Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 681 of People Behind the Science. Today, we are excited to be rebroadcasting our interview with Dr. Haley Oliver, originally released on August 8th of 2016. Now, through her research, Haley is working to improve food safety and reduce foodborne illness in the United States and around the world. She studies bacteria that cause illness and how they can be introduced and persist on food throughout each step of the process from farm to table. So listeners, get ready to learn a little and get inspired by Haley in this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. Today, listeners, I am thrilled to introduce you all to Dr. Haley Oliver. So, Haley, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. How's everything going?
Oh, absolutely wonderful here in the Midwest.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. And I'm excited to introduce you to our listeners and have us chat a little bit about your life in science. But to start off with, I want to give them just a little bit of background about you. So, listeners, Haley is an associate professor of food science at Purdue University. She's also an adjunct professor at Texas Tech University. She received her bachelor's in microbiology and molecular biology from the University of Wyoming, and she was awarded her PhD in food science from Cornell University. Next, Haley conducted postdoctoral research in food science at Cornell before joining the faculty at Purdue, where she is today. Now, Haley is the recipient of many awards and honors, including the International Association for Food Protection Young Researcher Award. She's also the recipient of the New Teacher Award and the National Early Career Teaching Award from the United States Department of Agriculture. And she's also the recipient of the Outstanding Academic Counseling and Outstanding Undergraduate Teaching Awards from Purdue University. And listeners, Haley is here with us today to talk about her experiences in life and science. So Haley, we want to get to know you today, both as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you start by telling us a little bit about what you do with your time when you're not doing science?
When I'm not doing science, there isn't much time left over after science, it seems like these days. But
this is true.
When I do have a minute, or when I finally wall off a few minutes, I like to spend my time actually trying to visit the people that I haven't been able to see because of my job. So I'm on the road today just to see some friends that used to be Purdue employees that I'm certainly missing, and spend my time going to beautiful places around the country, again, when I have that chance.
Gotcha. So where are you headed to today?
I'm headed to Rockford, Illinois.
Ooh, very nice. Well, we're glad to have you joining us when you're on the road today. And I think that's a great way to spend your time kind of visiting all your friends and seeing different places across the country. So that's awesome. So now, Haley, tell us a little bit about your scientific side next. How do you describe what you do to someone who's not familiar with your field?
Well, my type of science lives in both a very applied and very basic realms. What the big picture goal of my laboratories group is to reduce foodborne disease. And that's any type of bacterium, in our case, that has the ability to cause vomiting or diarrhea in people. So nobody likes diarrhea, right?
Of course.
I don't think we have to ask too many people if they'd volunteer for those types of studies.
Mm-hmm.
But we focus on looking at the food system and how people interact with it, how it's served, how it grows from start to finish, and how we might improve the safety of those products before it reaches the consumer.
Gotcha. Well, I think this is very important to research. I think myself and our listeners can all be in consensus here. None of us like vomiting and diarrhea, so continue doing your research.
Nobody has time for that.
That's right. So I'm excited to chat more about these research projects that you have going on. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what motivates you. I think as a scientist, there's so much to do in a day. As you said, you don't have a lot of time outside of the science that you do. So can you tell us what keeps you going? Do you have a favorite saying or a quote that you use to keep yourself motivated?
I have a quote that I use to keep my students motivated.
That's even better.
Or at least to keep my mind happy about all of the challenges. Science isn't easy. And if you don't like failure, if you can't deal with failure well, this really isn't the job for you. Mm-hmm. Because we have constant setbacks, or every day has its challenges, my favorite way to think about moving through the world is to bring me solutions, not problems. We have problems. We have known challenges. But what we're training students to do is actually to think. A PhD is really a degree in philosophy or a degree in learning. And so it's one thing to understand the science, but to actually bring solutions to problems, which again is really the theme of our research anyway, is what we're trying to achieve every day.
I love that. I'm the same way myself. I don't want to hear about the problems unless you at least have ideas for how to solve them. So
Right, because I love to complain, don't get me wrong, but if we don't have solutions, we're just complaining.
Exactly. Well, I think that is a fantastic motivational quote. Great applications for science. And I think not only do these quotes and sayings keep you going in your everyday life, but the people you work with, the people who you've had in your life can help be motivational forces too. So can you tell us a little bit about some of these people who may have motivated you or some role models you may have had?
I have been extraordinarily fortunate. I grew up in Wyoming in production agriculture, so on a farm with animals, and not in my wildest dreams would I have ever thought of going to the East Coast for school. I never thought about going to graduate school, and I certainly never dreamed I'd be a professor doing research that hopefully has positive impacts across the United States and across the world. But I've been very fortunate to have scientific advisors, usually my undergraduate advisors and my PhD advisors and postdoc advisors that are all very strong scientists and also very pro development of students. And I think because they're always interested in developing people and not just the science, they're looking at your career as a whole. That's how I got to where I am. And I try to take the positives and the negatives that I've seen through all of those experiences as I try to do the same for my students as well.
Certainly. So do you remember, were there some key traits that they helped you develop, or were there certain areas that they really pushed you to explore when you were going through?
Perfection, good or bad,
right,
is among some of the traits that we have to seek out, especially when you're doing research, when you're asking questions or making suggestions that could impact policy, that impact people behavior, that impact millions of dollars worth of industry. You need to have a lot of certainty and due diligence and being thorough and caring about what you do. And all of the role models, I think, that I look to or that I reflect on all have those traits and sincerity. They really care about what they do. They don't question any day of the week why they get out of bed to do what they do.
Certainly. I think that sincerity, that dedication to the science is so important, because as long as you care so much about it, it makes it much easier to be that perfectionist, to make sure everything's so precise.
Well, and it helps get through those frustrating, problematic days.
Absolutely. So now, can you tell us what really sparked your interest in science to begin with?
I started out as a communications major. That didn't work out. Let's put it that way.
Really?
Yes, I did. I was going to start out in agriculture communications. That was my first declared major at the University of Wyoming.
So why agriculture communications, if I may ask?
Oh, well, I don't know.
It seems very specific.
Right? It does. And well, it was a joint effort between the College of Agriculture and the College of Art and Sciences, where communication was housed, I believe. And I guess I had this idea that I could write, at least I could put a sentence together. And I came from agriculture, so I guess my knee-jerk reaction was maybe I'll put those two things together.
Sure.
And through the early coursework in communications, I was absolutely miserable. I couldn't understand the content of my interpersonal communication class. I don't know what that says about me.
Right. Well, you're doing a great job, Haley.
I found that class wonderfully miserable because every question, I will never forget this, every question on every quiz, all of the multiple choice answers seemed identical to me. There was no definitive answer, and maybe that gave me some insight into I liked hard facts. But I couldn't even argue or debate or support my answer. And that kind of terminated my enthusiasm for communication. I happened to take by chance microbiology. And I don't think anybody generally volunteers to take microbiology as a science requirement. I don't know what happened there, but I did. And it was the hardest class I ever took, ever.
Oh, wow.
Still, I think at the top of my list, I had to just kill it every day to try to get a B. But I was so motivated by the challenge that I eased over the next couple of semesters into a microbiology degree and then eventually a molecular biology degree because I ended up getting fascinated by DNA.
Interesting. So then what took you from this student starting to become interested in microbiology all the way to where you are today as a faculty member? What are some of these key moments?
Well, I'm sure I never got away from agriculture. I like things that apply to people that are relevant, and food, again, one of those other things we won't debate. We all have some appreciation for it.
Absolutely.
And so combining microbiology, which really excites me, with food gets you food microbiology. And food microbiology advanced training, it can be in a number of disciplines or different departments, but it's often in departments of food science, which are interdisciplinary of chemistry, microbiology, engineering. But food microbiology and food safety, so human applications certainly, are often housed in food science. Mm-hmm. So I applied to the best programs I could find that were doing the type of work that excited me. And the next 6 years after that were pretty much history at Cornell.
Well, Haley, wonderful to hear more about how you got to where you are today. But can you tell us now about one of these projects you have going on at Purdue that you are so excited to be working on?
One research project, well, among many that we have, but one that we're excited about that really just got underway is our investigation of Listeria monocytogenes. I know that's a mouthful. We'll just call it Listeria from now on.
Perfect.
Listeria and Salmonella foodborne bacteria prevalence, so the amount of it, and persistence, its ability to live in the same place over time, in retail produce establishments, so like grocery stores, for example. We're fortunate to have funding from the United States Department of Agriculture ASRI program, which funding is difficult to get these days, so that's why I say we're fortunate. Right. But this is important work because we're looking for additional foodborne disease challenges as food gets closer and closer to the consumer. So there isn't much data right now on foodborne pathogens, so the organisms that cause disease. We don't have a whole lot of information about if or how they live in some of our retail food systems like grocery stores.
Sure.
And so that's really kind of the premise of what a lot of the work in my laboratory has been for the past 6 years.
So are there certain types of food that you focus on?
So this particular study, the theme is produce. And so what that means to us from a research standpoint is looking in front of the house, what we'll call front of house. So where a consumer might be interfacing with products like the shelves or some of the other display type of casings, to the back of the house, so the produce preparation areas where cut fruit, produce is washed or prepared for sale. And so we're looking at both of those environments to see if we find pathogens in those environments. And the main goal is, if we do, we are partnered with industry in this particular study to come up with solutions to those challenges.
Interesting. So now, do you find that grocery stores or produce stores are pretty open to allowing you into their establishments, or are they worried about what you're going to find?
Well, the retail industry and grocery in particular, we've been working with them for over 6 years now. Initially, it was a difficult relationship to build. We're looking for things that can cause disease in people in your system. Now, that's not an easy thing to, I guess, think about sometimes. Sometimes you don't want problems if you don't have them.
Right.
But retail really is interested in doing the right thing and doing the best thing for customers, and they don't want to make anyone sick.
Sure.
Nobody positions themselves that way. They're interested in selling beautiful products to their consumers. And so we have had wonderful success recruiting retail to work with us. We have a number of partners across the United States that are interested in, one, knowing if there is a problem, and if it is, what can we do to fix it?
So are there things that you're learning that you can sort of recommend to help these retail establishments, or are you still kind of at the point of figuring out what the scope of the problem is?
We're early, so we're in the phase of understanding the scope of the challenge. So we're looking for 2 different bacteria, and we're looking for Listeria, and we're looking for Salmonella. And those are often associated with different situations. Listeria is a soil microorganism, so it can come into an environment a lot of different ways. It could be on a grocery cart. You could walk it in on your shoes, or it could naturally be present on leafy greens themselves. I mean, they grow in the dirt. We don't usually expect them to be free of bacteria.
Right.
And Salmonella, it's usually an indicator of fecal contamination, unfortunately, but that could have been through application of manure to fields that then subsequently found its way to produce, or worst case scenario, right? A small child, they're not always the cleanest little creatures on the planet.
Right.
Maybe they played with their turtle that's a natural carrier of Salmonella.
Sure.
And then went and, as they're running around, contaminated the surface.
Gotcha.
So we're trying to understand, again, what's there and maybe how it got there and what we can do about it.
Very cool. Well, wonderful to hear more about your research. And I think we've talked about a lot of the exciting elements of your science and your career, but we haven't yet talked about all the challenges, all the struggles, all the failures. And I think every scientist has a plethora of stories on this vein. So can you tell us, Haley, one of your stories of maybe a failure or a frustration or a challenge and how you worked through it?
Oh my goodness, which one to pick out?
Right.
I think one that would resonate with scientists, at least in my discipline across the board, would be failing to get the grant. What we didn't learn or what we weren't told when we start as faculty members is that we're essentially going to be running small businesses. And sometimes those businesses aren't all that small if you're working with millions of dollars of research funds and you're employing people. And like any business, people are usually the biggest challenge.
Right.
But grant funding, coming back to that, there's with USDA funding in the food sector, there's a success rate of between 5 and 10%. So for every 10 grants you write, you get one, optimistically.
Right.
And being constantly told no does get frustrating when you have graduate students that are paid employees. And so you have people that are dependent on you for their livelihood, and those grants are important for you to keep your job. So it's a tough environment. I don't want to really necessarily call it cutthroat, but I was just listening to a commentary on work-life balance, and it's really hard to make that exist when these are your odds if you want to be successful.
You find yourself spending a lot of extra time writing those extra grants, so maybe you can get one funded. I think you're absolutely right there.
Oh, yes. I just had put a week of vacation on my calendar, and then I'm thinking maybe I will just do that grant after all. And so there goes that week.
Right.
Oh, well.
Well, and I think a lot of the calls that I see, even in our field as well, I work in Parkinson's research, they don't give you a ton of notice. So it's like, okay, you see this thing pop up in your mailbox. I'm like, well, I can't not apply. So then the next 2 weeks are scrapped so you can get it in before the deadline. But
you are absolutely correct. We don't have a lot of time. We don't always know the priorities. So you have to scramble sometimes to come up with a viable idea, gather preliminary data, and then write something that doesn't have so many typos in it
right.
that people can't understand it because you're in a hurry.
At the wee hours of the morning. Yeah, right. So, Haley, how do you deal with some of these challenges, some of these rejections? What do you do when you get a grant rejected?
You have two options mostly. You can either cry or you can start laughing. And if you don't start laughing, at least some of the reviewer comments where you thought you did your best to communicate your idea, and their comments back as they reflect on your work clearly say you've missed the boat. Mm-hmm. So if you can't take it with a grain of salt and learn from it, it could destroy you. So you better just start laughing.
Right.
I think you can maybe fix it and do better next time.
Certainly. So has there been recently maybe a particular grant or a particular idea that you were really excited to get funding about that's been a challenge to get funded?
My most recent idea did get funding. I'm not in a position to complain today. My next idea, the one that's taking my week of vacation away, it's probably going to be my biggest challenge yet, as I always looking for problems or understanding if there is a problem in some challenging sectors of food. And so retail is challenging because no one really had much, there really wasn't much public data in that sector. A lot of food data from manufacturing, but anytime you move into a new area where you're asking people if they want to know if they have problems, it's just going to be hard.
Absolutely. Well, I think you brought up some really great points in talking about these challenges that scientists face today and some of your personal experiences with them. But we don't just want to talk about the tough times as a scientist. So, Haley, next, I want to first congratulate you on the success of your recent application. But then I do want you to tell us about one of your success stories, one of these things that meant a lot to you, whether it's a big success or even just a little win along the way.
I think anytime any one of my students graduates and gets a job that pays more than mine. Yeah. No. It's either be jealous or smile. No, I'm kidding. No, senior students that are products of a lot of hard work that all comes together, and then they go out and positively contribute to the food industry, to government, to research. There isn't anything more satisfying than that. Or to have people call you and say, when are your students done, because we want them.
Really?
I mean, that's not me. I just try to make sure they get paid and have an idea to work on. But it's them. It's seeing them be successful is the biggest measurement to me of my success.
Well, that is phenomenal. Really cool that people are calling you, kind of begging you for your students. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I wish I had more to sell. I wish I could fund my research. I'd have to sell my students to them, but that's probably not the most fruitful strategy.
Sure. So can you tell us maybe about some of these recent graduates that you've had in your laboratory and what they've gone on to do?
Sure. So my career's pretty early, all things considered. And I don't have as many students graduated as somebody, say, who's been in the field for 20 years. Mm-hmm. But I have students that are working directly with the food industry. So they are leads of food safety for processing plants and foods that might be considered high risk. And so their jobs are stressful, but they're sought after and retained often because they do such good work directly with the food industry. Another upcoming graduate of mine, she'll defend her PhD, Susie Hammonds, in 1 or 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
She probably would hope I know the exact date.
Yeah. You'll be there. It'll be fine. It's on your calendar.
She's looking at opportunities from the private sector, from trade associations, from the government, and even academia. So having people like that are really being pulled in every direction, it's hard on them because they have a lot of decisions to make. But I think what an opportunity when you've got that many options.
Absolutely. And I know you have won several awards for your teaching. It sounds like you're quite gifted in the mentorship arena as well. Can you tell us a little bit about these teaching and mentorship aspects of your career and what they mean to you?
Well, when I was first hired at Purdue in 2010 is when I started. I actually had a primary teaching appointment, which is rare in our discipline. Really, research is what most people think of, or at least people in academia think of what you should be doing or what you are there to do. Mm-hmm. But I was actually there to teach and do research. And in teaching, demonstrate success in teaching pedagogy, so actually research and teaching. And I wasn't trained to do that.
Interesting.
Nobody really is, usually if you come from a science discipline like microbiology. And so I had to do a lot of learning in order to become at least my definition of successful in teaching. So I was luckily surrounded by wonderful graduate students. So my first teaching assistant saved my career. I tell her that often.
It's a good claim to fame.
Everybody else is doing all the hard work, it seems like. I'm just there to support them. Purdue College of Agriculture has a deep culture and a deep history of quality of education. And so I use those resources to parlay that into microbiology. Because I like doing my job, I'm committed to doing it well. I figured out what that meant. And really, Purdue has been wonderful at championing me.
Well, that is fantastic to hear more about these other sides of your career, and interesting that you started with that primary teaching appointment. I think you're right. I haven't heard of many people whose priority when they're coming into an academic faculty position is, okay, focus on teaching. For the most part, it's like you have to get your research program off the ground and you also have to do all these classes, make it work kind of thing.
And that's exactly how it happened. So the research program had to, because of perception, my research program, I felt for safety of my career needed to be just as strong as anyone else's. Mm-hmm. And so why I didn't have any free time there for a few years, sure, it might have been at least my perception that I needed to be 100% successful, or at least 95% successful in both of those.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations. It sounds like you have been quite successful in both arenas. And now we've talked a little bit about your life outside of science as well as your science. And I know scientists keep quite busy with all the reading, all the research, all the grants they're writing, but you have to find a little bit of time for fun as well. And I love to chat with science about what they are reading for fun. So, Haley, do you have a book that you're reading right now or one that you've read that you've really enjoyed that you'd like to recommend to me and our listeners? I
actually don't like recommending books to people.
Really? It's a lot of pressure.
Well, there is pressure, and I often find the books that people recommend to me offensive.
Really?
Well, my mother hears this, she'll kill me. Here's some ways to be better at X. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Oh, goodness. So I actually try to refrain from doing that. If I'm going to read, it's often for pleasure, and it could be something completely mindless just because I need a slight dose of that. I'm more a person of reading the news, and that's really where I spend most of my free reading time. Because we've talked about teaching, we've talked about research. The other side of the things that we do at Purdue, a few of my colleagues and I, is we spend a decent amount of time in Afghanistan. We're working in food safety capacity building there to USAID supported work. Mm-hmm. And so understanding the general scope of the world or challenges of the world outside of the lab is really important to what we do.
Certainly. And I think it's really easy for scientists to almost get that tunnel vision. You're so dedicated to the project you're working on in the lab at the bench that you sort of lose sight of what's going on in the bigger picture in the world.
Absolutely. And people ask why I go to Afghanistan. And I said, well, it's the right thing to do. It's hard to comment on a country like that or to have a true perspective unless you've been there or really have studied it well. And it makes some of our challenges at home not such a big deal.
Right.
So it's excellent for tempering perspective and for keeping in check those things that are really important.
Absolutely. So you mentioned travel to Afghanistan, and I think travel is a big part of the career of a scientist. Haley, is there one particular place that you have been for science that really strikes you as your favorite travel destination?
Well, my favorite place in the world is still probably Traverse City, Michigan. I just can't help it. I love that part of the world.
Really? What about it?
Cherries are my favorite fruit. It's one of Michigan's wine regions. It's beautiful. I don't know. It's peaceful to me. And I guess that's what I'm seeking often. But if I had to pick somewhere in the world that I enjoy, oh my goodness. I think every trip I've ever had to Turkey has been wonderful. Of course, they're having quite a day right now with the recent military coup.
Sure.
And India. Both places, beautiful, excellent food culture, and so welcoming. Really enjoyed that part of the world.
Definitely. So have you gotten to do your research in these places, or have you traveled mostly for conferences or for fun?
Well, it's always been for work. But I'm fortunate that my work takes me to some challenging places and it takes me to some beautiful places as well. I guess I'm always excited to almost stay home sometimes. Right. That's my version of a break.
Unpack your suitcase, maybe do some laundry finally.
When you have two suitcases, different sizes for different events, and you wash your clothes and put them right back in the other one, it's a little defeating sometimes.
This is true. So can you tell us a little bit about your travels to Turkey? What are some of the places you've been? What are some of the things you've been able to see and do there?
I haven't been in a few years, but in my first trip, a good friend of mine, Yashim Sawyer, also a PhD student and graduate from Cornell, from Turkey. So we have our local contacts, which is a great way to see the country. At the time, and because things were peaceful, we actually spent some time in Şanlıurfa, which is near this, not too far from the Syrian border. Of course, that'd be extraordinarily challenging here today.
Sure.
But it's the production agriculture. It's where agriculture started for humanity, really, in what they call the Gap region of Turkey, Mesopotamia. And just to see that scope of agriculture, to see production of food that really allowed humanity to grow, it's awing. And, of course, it also can be 120 degrees Fahrenheit, so that'll take your breath away as well.
Of course. Well, that sounds really, really cool. So, Haley, thank you so much for telling us a little bit about these travel experiences. Like I said, it's a big part of the job, and I think something a lot of young scientists look forward to, all these places that they may get to go for their research or for conferences. And now you mentioned some of your colleagues, some of the students you've worked with over the years, as well as your mentors. And I think the people in science are phenomenal. I think there's some stereotypes out there about what scientists are like, but we always try and break up on our show because I think there are such a variety of people. And when you get them all together, quirky things happen, funny things happen. So I love sharing these stories of just fun memories of science. So can you share one with us today?
Sure. I understand the stereotypes, and sometimes there's molds that you are expected to fit into. And I decided kind of early in my career that there were a few things I didn't want to compromise on, and that I was still going to try to be successful in my job. And one is wearing lipstick. Man, I do love good bright orange lipstick. There's just no outrunning it.
Yeah.
And that can often be, again, perceptions of what a scientist, a woman in science should look like.
Sure.
Does it degrade your credibility? I don't know, maybe. But I try to position what we do to be more important than my orange lipstick. And I enjoy fast cars. I've always loved sports cars. I drive a Corvette. It's atypical for a woman in her 30s to think that that's her daily driver, at least when it's not snowing. Again, doesn't fit the stereotype, but it gives people something to think about, and I enjoy it. And it's always something that they can talk to me about without having to worry about talking about science.
I think that's awesome. So what color is your Corvette?
cybermetallic gray.
Ooh, I was kind of hoping you'd say bright orange, but
My mom wanted an orange one. We tried to find her one, but hers is silver. So
gotcha.
We're working toward orange. I think in a perfect world, it would be some, I don't know, almost purple, I suppose is what I would do. So when Chevy finally takes my advice, I'll spend some money. Maybe.
Get that purple convertible.
Yes, exactly. Because the red would be too stereotypical.
That's right. That's right. Well, Haley, wonderful to hear a little bit about how you're outside of these stereotypes. Like you said, you're not compromising. You're not trying to fit into that mold of drab colors and sort of doing what people might expect a woman in science to do. So I love that. And now we've talked a little bit about some of these research questions that you're answering in your laboratory, and I think you're doing phenomenal work. But I want to make you think big with us today. So can you tell us if things like funding, staff, technology, feasibility, all the problems that we face in science were not a problem anymore? Is there one question that you are just dying to know the answer that you would want to tackle first?
If I could be the person that really helped us go to Mars,
Ooh.
I think that would be phenomenal. I know it's on the book. It's on schedule. I hear from NASA the other day, 2030. But if we can truly make that a reality, I think that would be a really exciting thing for me to see.
So do you have a secret interest in space travel?
I don't know that I need to go to space.
Yeah.
Growing up, my dad was extremely in love with physics and with astronomy. And so in Wyoming, where there are no people and it's often clear skies, we have no light pollution, excellent opportunity to look at things beyond just this planet. And so when Juno made it to Jupiter the other day, I couldn't help but tear up.
Aww.
A $1 billion project that a 35-minute rocket burn, it was dependent on the success of that. I mean, I can't think of higher stakes as a scientist than something like that. And if my research fails, we can ask the questions a little bit different way. When you've waited years for your scientific instrument to arrive,
right,
it's a completely different level of thrill.
And plus, like the years and years of planning that goes on before each mission. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a different level.
Yeah. So was there ever a point when you were growing up that you considered maybe instead of going into this agricultural world, this world of astronomy and space research?
I actually didn't. And I don't know why.
Gotcha.
I have no idea why. I think I'm a product of my immediate environment once in college. And I didn't start out in science, which a lot of women don't. Mm-hmm. The number's increasing, but I think I am happy with how I drifted over into it eventually. Am I going to reboot as a physicist? No, I don't think so.
No, not today.
I'll let the people that really have it under control do it.
Sure. Well, Haley, wonderful to hear about this big question, travel to Mars. I think that will be very exciting to watch those events unfold. Hopefully we'll make it there in 2030. And now we've chatted a little bit about some of the people who you've encountered in your career as a scientist. And you talked about some of the mentors that you've had and how they've helped shape you and develop you as a scientist and a person. And I think these mentors, these people you work with and encounter are great sources of advice. And I love passing advice on to our listeners who may be going through their own scientific journey. So can you share with us one piece of advice that sticks in your mind as just a phenomenal piece of advice that helped you?
Listening when people ask you questions, I think. What changed my career, how I thought about what I would become, my undergraduate mentor at the University of Wyoming, in the hallway of Animal Science building, I'll never forget where I was. He asked me, have you ever thought about going to graduate school? And I hadn't. I'm a first-generation college student. I was excited to get into college. I was excited just to finish. And I really hadn't planned much beyond that. And so those questions that people ask you can really change how you think about where you're going and certainly what you become.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important point for any faculty members who might be listening out there or students who may be going on to an academic faculty position is ask your students those questions because, right, you may have never considered that as a possibility.
I ask every one of them now.
Yeah.
What's your plan?
What's your plan? Grad school? Yes.
Have you thought about it?
I love it.
Have you thought about graduate school? Not that you need to go, but just think about it as an option.
Certainly. Well, I think that is fantastic advice. And not only listening to those questions related to academics, but also just listening in general. I find that's definitely a learned skill. It's hard not to always chime in and not to always be the one talking. So just to sit back and listen sometimes.
Exactly.
Well, Haley, fantastic advice. Is there any other last piece of advice or a last note of inspiration that you want to end our conversation on today?
I think working hard, it just seems to still be the key to a lot of the successes that my group has. And it's hard to often balance that out with some of those breaks, but I really appreciate how hard everybody does work and their dedication to improving food safety and the general discipline of science. And I look forward to all of the students that are onboarding into my program in the fall, and look forward to having several of them over the next couple of years in my career.
Absolutely. Well said, Haley. I think there's no way to avoid the hard work sometimes. Be prepared for it in science.
Unfortunately, that's right.
So now, can you tell our listeners where they can go if they want to learn more about you and your work?
I'm easy to find on the internet, actually. A quick Google of Haley Oliver at Purdue University is an easy way to find my website through the Purdue University College of Agriculture, and my contact information is available there.
Perfect. Well, listeners, definitely check out the website, learn more about the fantastic work that Haley is doing. And Haley, thank you so much for joining us today on our program.
You bet.
Well, it was wonderful to chat with you. And listeners, as always, thank you for joining us as well. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to explore the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to chatting with you next time on People Behind the Science.